This is Cuong Pham. I'm a founder of Red Belt Fish Sauce.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over. Thank you, Anh, for coming on today. The first generation of Vietnamese people to come and, find this security and the jobs. And I understand that you were an engineer over at Apple for many years. You're in the tech space for a long time. And I heard recently in another podcast that you were on that you wish you started Red Boat a lot earlier. But the journey has been, I'm sure, very tough. So can you tell me a little bit about wishing to start earlier and if this path has been a very difficult path or not for you?
Right. The whole thing with Red Boat Fish Sauce, when I started it, is because of my mom, right? So I was happy doing my job. It's kind of burned out a little bit, but when I had a chance to visit Vietnam and took a trip to Phu Quoc Island, I got a few bottles from there, brought it back to my mom, and basically she literally cried. And then she found something that she has missed for so long. And then, I just gave her the bottle. I said yes. And then a few weeks later, I come back, visit her, and I see she hardly use it. So I asked her, I say, Mom, I thought you like it so much. Why are you not using it? And she say, oh, are you kidding me? This stuff is so precious. I'm not just using it every day. We just waited for the right occasion when the family get together or when we have dam yo. This is like something that, people get together and she cooks with that stuff. And that's make me wonder. I say, wow, something this good. And we've been missing it and cannot be found in the States. Wonder why. And that gave me the motivation. And when I get started and I see more people using it and loving it, and I say, oh, wow, we could have started it earlier.
What do you think was in that Phu Quoc bottle that was different from anything on the market at the time?
Okay. The bottle I got is through a friend of a friend who happened to own the factory. So we drain the fish sauce from the barrel. And that particular quality, it usually, okay, go back a little bit. My mom has a cousin who owned the factory, and this is where we're getting fish sauce from. Usually, good fish sauce, we don't sell, we just give it to friends and family. And that's what we've had, and that's what we used to growing up with from my mom's cooking, right? So that bottle, so two things. Fish sauce come from Phu Quoc. It's been famous for a very, very long time, and there's a reason for it. A lot of different regions making fish sauce, but Phu Quoc, as I get into it, I learn about it. There's a science behind it. Three things that make Phu Quoc fish sauce so unique. With 80 good products, right? We started out with good raw material. Raw material here is the fish, the black anchovies in the Gulf of Thailand. Gulf of Thailand cover Thailand, Cambodia, and Phu Quoc. So that is the key ingredients, the little tiny anchovies. Secondly, is the process. Only Phu Quoc that I know of, salting the fish on the boat immediately is gone. It makes a huge difference because the fish is preserved. It's not been rotten, when they bring it to shore and load it into the barrel. The third thing would be the climates of Phu Quoc, hot year round, and the fermentation environment, the wooden barrels, the temperature, and the way they've done it for hundreds of years. Those three key factors produce, the fish sauce from Phu Quoc. I noticed that people, when they see fish sauce from Phu Quoc, it's so different, and they're trying to replicate it because Phu Quoc is an island that back at the time is a small village, a fishing village, very hard to get to. There's no infrastructure or whatever. So they bring the process, they create the barrel house on the mainland, either Red Ya or some other places. So they can catch the fish from there. They can follow the process, but the fermentation is not the same. They don't have the climate. So the end product is not the same. So those are the three key factors that make Phu Quoc fish sauce so unique.
That makes a lot of sense. But how did you even know that that is the difference between Phu Quoc product and nước mắm from Thailand or from other regions of Vietnam?
Okay. We try fish sauce from Phu Quoc, and this is basically that's how we grew up with the kind of quality. Phu Quoc for fish sauce making from other regions. I'm not sure how all the detail, all the other manufacturer they making it, but lacking one of those three. So fish sauce, the way the quality is like wine, terroir related, right? You have wine come from Napa Valley, you have wine come from Bordeaux, from Italy, all that stuff, right? Some main appellations. The key ingredient is the grapes, for example, right? And then you have the climate where the grape is grown, and then you have the winemaker and all that stuff. So related to that, Phu Quoc is a very unique place that it has those three key factors that creating the product of what it is.
That makes sense. Now, when you say barrels, I think of wine, and I think of how oak or other types of wood affect wine and the taste of it. And when I think of fish sauce, I keep thinking that there are cement tanks or metal tanks that you throw anchovies in, but you've talked about barrel houses. So can you tell me how this affects the science of the taste of fish sauce?
Okay. Yeah, you probably notice if you're reading blogs, fish sauce making from other region, they're not using the wooden vats, basically the huge vats. It's holding about 10, 15 tons. So what makes fish sauce is when we catch the whole anchovies, salting it. Salting is very key thing. So that's why our product has two ingredients, right? The fish and the salt. Salting is agreeing the key things because what it does is it kills the bad bacteria and then promoting the good bacteria, which is the enzyme that lives in the guts of the fish, right? So when you bring it in to the wooden vat, why is wooden vat? Maybe at the time there's nothing around in Phu Quoc, so they utilize all the wood on the island and making those vats. But it turned out that it's my research when I look into it, the science of it. The enzyme that breaking down the fish, they need two things for it to thrive. The first thing is the right amount of salt. The second thing is the temperature, meaning, and then the environment, the fermentation environment, that means that the temperature inside where the fermentation is very constant, they're not changing. And wood, I think, is doing exactly what it is that help the enzyme thrive during the 12 months.
No, we can continue talking about the science of this for another 2 hours.
I know.
and I'm always down to talk about the technical side of these processes. But I want to get to know who you are. I want to get to know what you came to the United States thinking that you would be doing. And what made you shift from such a comfortable living into something so, I mean, in my mind, it's very risky to do something this big and an endeavor that at the scope.
Okay, so I'm an immigrant. I'm a boat people. I left Vietnam in 1979 by boat. Landed in the refugee camp in Malaysia. We stayed there for 9 months. I learned a lot from those 9 months.
How old were you at the time?
I was 20 at the time. So I have a little bit I want to share with you. The reason I know I'm 20, but technically by Vietnamese age, I'm 21 because I was born in 1958 and this is 79. So theoretically, I'm 21 by Vietnamese age, right? So we went to the island. We got accepted into the camp and we're waiting to be settled on the third country. Could be US, Canada, Australia, all of those things. I want to go to the USA, America. And in order to go there, they have four categories. Category one, you have immediate family, brother, sister, father. And then that category one, which usually it takes about 6 months to leave. Category two, if you work for the US government. My dad worked for the US government. And because of, I'm not my dad, but I be eligible because of that, because I'm his son. The third thing is people involved with the military from the old regime. And number four is none of those above. So the timing could be, depends on your category. So I was looking, I had my brother who studied in Italy at the time, but I didn't relocate him until much later. So I looked at it and said, oh, wow, I could be number two because my dad works for the US government. So I applied for it. And when it's time for me to interview, and they asked me where my dad works and all that stuff, so I gave them the brief history of what I remember. And 2 weeks later, they came back and said, yep, I verify your dad used to work there.
Where was your dad at the time?
Oh, he's still in Vietnam. I was the first one who left Vietnam.
Wow.
By boat. So we said, oh, okay, you got accepted because, yeah, your dad works there, like what you said. And then they asked me, I said, okay, how old are you? I said, I'm 21. I said, oh, I'm sorry, you cannot accept you because you're 21, you're no longer a minor. So I'm sorry. I was rejected. I said, wow, that was close. So I left the table. I stepped like 3 steps away. And they looked at, and he called me back and said, wait a second, you come back and sit down. You're not 21, you're only 20 because you were born in October and this is July. So technically you're eligible to go. I said, oh my gosh, it felt so good. So anyway, so that's why the age is I left in when I was 20, but then when I arrived here, I'm 21. So,
yeah.
Okay. So I landed. First city is in Boston on the East Coast. And then, my family's like one member at the time, we start leaving after that. So my other brother also left by boat. And then he arrived and then he moved to California. And then he asked me to join him. So I went to California, San Jose Bay Area, and went to school, studied there, landed the job at Apple back in 1984. And I was there for over 2 decades with Apple, as an engineer, IT engineer. And then I left Apple doing consulting job, traveling everywhere. That's the thing that I'd like, being consulting, doing different things, traveling different places, see how people live on the other world, beside the US. So, and that's basically landed me a trip to Vietnam. I was in Southeast Asia. We had a lot of projects down there, Australia, Singapore. So I took the side trip to Vietnam, and my friends asked me to go to Phu Quoc. I'm not searching for fish sauce at the time, but basically that's where it's famous for fish sauce, right? So that's how I got the bottle, and I brought it back. And my mom was so happy that we found it.
And during the entire time of working at Apple or as a consultant, did you have an itch to become a business person?
I always want to have a business. So even though I was consulting, I was thinking about, doing something for myself because, I've been working with big corporations all my life, basically. So yeah, but that's not the fish sauce producer. That's not something that in my mind at the time.
Yeah. And I think you started the journey around 2006 and finally launched 2011. Is that right?
Yes.
Now,
yeah.
During the 5 years, what happens? Why does it take so long to launch?
Because there's a lot of learnings to do. People think making fish sauce is easy, but making fish sauce, the way it's traditionally made, not leveraging or utilizing any artificial flavors, and the way that we used to growing up with, and with the right amount of olive. So there's a lot of trial and error, you know. So everybody think, yes, easy. Just go get fish, you salt it, 12 months later you get it. Yes, you get fish sauce, but not the kind that you can be proud to present it to the consumers.
Or to your mom?
To my mom, yes.
So when I think about business, there's a few categories. Getting capitalized, getting the production and technical side right, getting the marketing, and pushing the longevity of a business into the future. You could not have been good at everything, but you could not have been bad at everything. So what were the things that you sort of understood in those 5 years of the development phase from '06 to 2011 that you were good at, and what were you bad at? And how did you kind of like figure out how to kind of open and expand the market of Redboat?
Right. So creating the product is one thing, again, optimizing the process and getting good enough that, it's closest to what it used to be. It's a challenge. And that's why I didn't want to launch anything earlier than that until we find something. So we found it finally after learning it, what's the critical process, what the discipline, what you have to go through. And you get advice all along the way from people who've done it for years, and for people who, they're always a way to get the products out. But to me, going from what I'm doing into this, it can't just like a business. You have to bring something meaningful, right? We know a lot of immigrants, a lot of people who live outside of Vietnam, who, just like our family, my mom, actually, my cousin, all our close relatives, when we brought the fish sauce back, and they love it. It's hard to sell at the time because people don't understand until, you have the right products, the right presentation of the products and all that. So going back and being with Apple, right? We value quality, bring users experience. User experience meaning, yes, they cook with it, they use it, and they love it. It's not like, yeah, you make something and then, maybe you hit 50%, 30% of your consumers. That's not what we after. We want to make sure that we have the right product, it's user friendly, something that, Vietnamese can be proud of. Like we have a product that has been utilized by other than Asian culture or other than Asian cuisine, because I've seen my mom cook fish sauce. She's a great cook anyway. She cook, make pasta sauce. She make pasta from scratch. She makes French food because she's a foodie. She loves to cook. Mm. And I say, well, this can go more than just, typical Asian dishes. So that's why, our goal is we're hitting more than just the Asian pantries.
I mean, a lot of people don't realize how much fish sauce is in mainstream food. There was a chain of hamburger restaurants called Umami Burgers.
Yes.
Many years ago. They're pretty big now. And in the beginning, the way that they had marketed, because the original store was here in LA in La Brea, and one of the first things that they had brought up was the fact that they use fish sauce in their patties. And it was such a big thing at the time, and I was like, what? And as I began to learn more about international cuisines, mainstream cuisines, there's so much anchovies, there's so much fish sauce that's being used. I mean, if you think about Caesar salads, there's like this anchovies in it. And a lot of us don't think about that because we think mainstream food or Italian cooking is just a little bit more. We don't think of this pungent smell of fish, but in actuality, to get that deep umami, we need to have that fish sauce.
Right, because if you look at the history, if did research on that, fish sauce or garum is invented by the Greeks, right, thousands of years ago,
Right.
and the Roman commercialize it, and they make it. Basically, it's the same thing. Key thing is anchovies. Anchovy.
Let's repeat
That's how.
on the
Yeah,
podcast so all the Vietnamese people understand that the Vietnamese or the Chinese did not invent fish sauce. This garum came from Greece, came in vats, and it was traded by the Romans. And the
exactly.
Romans somehow, with the Chinese, brought it over, and it just got to Vietnam as well.
I'm not sure that that's why we don't have historian that keep track of, but yeah, I mean it's similar, but every region that has fish and salt, and they can make fish sauce, right? But the quality, the flavor, how deep it is, the savory of that depends on those three things. Like how people did it back then and how we're doing it now. Different region, have different type of fish sauce as well. So back to your points, yes, it is going into mainstream. It's funny you mentioned Umami Burger. He's the first one, Adam Fletcher. He's the founder. He reached out to me. He said, "Oh wow, I want to try your sauce." I said, "Okay, we ship it to you." I said, "Wow, you're expensive." I said, "Okay," and then he tried and he loved it, and then we expanded from there. But other of course, Vietnamese love that, right? Like one thing that I still remember by now, my cousin, she called me and she said, "Whatever you do, don't give up. This is something that we need. Don't ever give up." And we were struggling at the time, struggling meaning, oh, you're busy doing different things, trying to get the products out, right? But I said, don't quit, just stay with it. I still remember it. But back then, when we launched it, the Asian people, actually the older generation of my mom, when they found it, and I go back to the store, I asked them, I say, how people respond? I say, oh yeah, they love it. And I say, oh, you're selling well? I say, yes. Oh, people buy it by the cases. They don't buy it by the bottle. It's just like, the older generation, the old ladies, just like on the limb, they just carry this stuff out. At the time, we have like the 6 packs and they buy it by the case because they didn't think that they're going to find it again.
Wow.
And it's so good. And then on the other side, we launch it into mainstream. And then we've got chef from, Le Bernardin in New York reach out to me and say, hey, do you sell it in food service size? We'd like to get some of that. And that's when I realized that, yeah, I mean, this has, can be in beyond Asian culture, cuisine as well.
Now, I want to ask something political, and it's something that, I talk about on the podcast all the time. And as a child of the South Vietnamese government, it sounds like you are as well. I'm a product of Tù Cải Tạo. I am a product of my grandfather being killed in 1944 under the hands of Viet Minh, the whole nine. I get all of that, and I get the pain and the suffering and all that. But as a person today, a modern Vietnamese person existing in the world, my brother lives in Vietnam for 20 years. He's been doing business in Vietnam. I've been doing business off and on in Vietnam for also 20 years. And, every time I think about your brand, Red Boat, I think about the implications of somebody at your generation and perhaps the battles that you have to deal with within our community saying, hey, we're going back to Vietnam and we're doing business with the other side. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know it's very political, but I question this question all the time because as a person who was born in America, I should have no allegiance, or I should not even worry about what other Vietnamese people from anywhere talk and think about my journey. I should just be able to independently go around along. So I think about Red Boat, and I think about, like, at your level and at your stage of living, and the pain and the suffering that we've suffered, the trauma in our history as a culture. Where do we have to kind of put our brains to deal with our community that has, it's a very small fraction of people that pushes back on the modern Vietnamese and the globalization of, like, our partnerships?
Um, anyway, making fish sauce, the products that I'm producing, or I bring it, introducing to the people, for the people who live here, all immigrants. And this is something that is good. It's kind of disappear because no one has done it and it hasn't been brought here. And my mom loved it. We bring it for our family first. We didn't think it's going to be this big at the time. We just say, hey, at least we got something we enjoy. Whoever, used to have it, this is something, right? Not thinking so much about this is, I'm going to go build an enterprise there. I'm going to grow and deal with all the politics. No, that's not what in my mind. We just focus on, okay, how do we bring the best fish sauce that can be only be produced in Phu Quoc,
Right.
right? For the people to enjoy and forget about everything else. We just focus on that. So I'm not doing business in Vietnam. I'm doing business here. We're just producing something, we bring it here. Simple as that. So I'm not quite sure with other people how they think, oh, people come and go back into business. My vision is different. That's the only thing. We have a good product. If we're not keeping it up, it probably will disappear someday. And it would be so sad for so many foodies around the world where they could, you know, beneficially enjoy it.
I love your answer because it's product first,
Right.
it's service first. Let's get whatever's coming out of Vietnam to the rest of the world. That's a beautiful thing. And I hope that the community at large that pushes back on any of this stuff understands that idea, which is product first. Let's get the best that we can get out into the world, into the best kitchens in the United States and across Europe. Because I understand you have a big distribution house in Germany, right?
Right. Yeah. So we worldwide now. We had distribution in Australia, Southeast Asia, Germany, which is Europe, and mainly 90% of our business is in the America, the United States. So,
Yeah. So it's awesome. Now we're getting to see this brand Red Boat as a product that 90% is coming, into the United States, and we're consuming it. And it's made such an impact on when I was a child. I think about how my mom would make chicken wings with nước mắm.
yeah,
And it was so embarrassing because we would bring it into our classrooms and it would just stink up the whole classroom. And I live with that stigma. I mean, still to this day, I think about that trauma of kids making fun of us with garlic and nước mắm. It was
yeah,
horrible.
yeah, yeah. No, I know that feeling. And when I worked at Apple, there's people that service, used to do service, and they say, "Oh, you're Vietnam, you might love fish sauce," that kind of thing. The comments. Sometimes not much of the compliments, and some of the feedback that I've heard is very, very. I'm just proud that we bring something.
Yeah.
So I give you an example. There's an older generation. She called me after she used our product, and she said, "Oh, I want to tell you something. My husband, he's a serviceman in Vietnam. He works there, and one thing that she could, because she cooked for him every day, right? And one thing that he told her, don't ever put fish sauce in any of the food because he can't just stand it, right? And so for the whole time, she didn't dare to do it because it's for that reason. He's not gonna be happy. But once they found Red Bull, she used it, she loved it, she sneaked it in, and he didn't even notice. And he even complimented and said, "Wow, your food is good."
Yeah.
What is that? That kind of thing make us proud. Like you Vietnamese, you have the product. You present it to the world, and this is we should all be proud of. And that's one of the mission that we hope we can get it there. A lot of good feedback from Asian, non-Asian people who use our product. It's
It,
just all.
it's crazy on how the magic of branding works because fish sauce has existed for, again, hundreds of years. And in America, we've been here for 50 years and been shamed into not eating what our mothers have produced, and we can't take it to a cafeteria. And then the magic of branding is like, okay, well, we're going to bring something high quality and we're going to make sure that the marketing and the branding is understood that this is a high quality product, and it changes the perception from the quality, the actual quality of the product.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the feedback that we've got from Vietnamese younger generation, older generation, the mainstream chefs, and those are the comments that we're getting. So,
When I eat pho
mhm.
and I, go to a restaurant and I want to test if the broth, the nuc pho is quality, there's only kind of like one way to do it scientifically in the way I do it. You can't really taste it well enough because sometimes the bouillon cubes are powdered into, and then the taste throws you off. But the one way that I've consistently feel that works is when you take the pho, let it cool down. You buy it to go, let it cool down, and you put it in the refrigerator, and it becomes gelatin, right? It becomes tat, right? It becomes thick in cold temperature, and you can tell that came from bones, that came from
Mm-hmm.
8-10 hours of cooking the bones, and the gelatin comes out of the bone. Then you're having real pho, regardless of the taste and how well that the flavoring is. That's a way that I test pho broth to be, and who knows if people throw gelatin powder in. Yeah, who knows if that happens, but typically that's how I test my pho wherever I go if I like that restaurant. How do you test for good Nick Mum? How do we know other than just what we're tasting? Is there a way to visually or scientifically, how do we know that we're getting high quality Nick Mum?
Very good question. It's hard to describe, but if you look in front of the bowl of fish sauce, right, and then you can compare. Full fish sauce, the color is unique, dark red amber. Over time, it get oxidized because food work also produce the fish sauce is high in nitrogen, and probably because the fish, because the process, and those things that I mentioned. Though, in order to tell, if you look at, okay, so two things to start it with. Nutritional panels, what is it in there? Fish and salt. Those are the only two. You don't need any other artificial flavor to enhance it. Those are the things because it's good enough. Why you want to muck around with it, right?
Yeah.
Nutritional values, which is a protein content, which is that's give you the depth of the flavor. So looking at from the outside, just more for educational purpose in terms of people trying to pick different type of pizzas because anything they can say on the front label, the big letters, say anything you want. You cannot lie on the nutritional panel because that's the law. You have to disclose what it is, right?
Right.
So let's go by there. So to start with, and then if you look at the fish sauce, you pour the sauce out, you see the thickness of it. There's a viscosity, meaning the high protein, the protein that, when you shake the bowl of fish sauce, you can see the viscosity, the stuff that, hang on the wall. Those indication of good fish sauce. The other one's very liquid. It's very thin, right? Because diluted or whatever. Good quality fish sauce, visually, if you look at the color, red amber, and then the viscosity of the sauce, that's an indication of good, right? And then you test it. When you tested it, if you don't test the sweetness of that, which is a good thing because unless you put sugar or sweetener in there, then it's sweet. It's salty. It hits you. Fine. But then the lingering effect, that's what tells you, yeah, those are the savory, that the sweetness from the fish protein People can add anything in there that create sweetness, but the fish protein, they have that lingering effect on your throat when you tested it.
That's what the Japanese called umami, right?
Yeah.
That lingering
The food
satisfaction,
taste, yes. The savory,
the
yes.
savory satisfaction that,
Mm-hmm.
which is umami. Now, how do you test for protein in a fish sauce? I know that we read the nutrition label, but how do we? I mean, is there any way that we can actually identify the real protein high numbers versus the lower numbers?
This disclose in there, like the number of grams of protein per serving, right? So if you use fish sauce, the per serving is around 18 grams or 15 millimeters, the serving size. And then with that standard serving size, then you look at the protein contents. But then you also have to look in the ingredients list, right? Sometimes you get protein from wheat protein, from wheat. That's different from fish, right? So if you don't have anything else, you start with two ingredients and your high protein contents, that means it's more savory in the sauce for you. But again, sometimes it's misleading. I don't want to get into too technical in terms of how you differentiate it, but the nutritional benefits is actually amino acid, the one that in the sauce. That's about 60% of the total protein and nitrogen level. So those factors that actually give you, because they can have high protein, high nitrogen, but your nutritional value, which is the amino acid, is low, then you're not going to get, that type of flavor. But again, I don't want to go too much into the technical aspect of that. But, the thing is like side by side test, and then you can tell. But before you test any product, if you want to compare orange to orange, they have to start with two ingredients. If they're not, and then you cannot compare the fish sauce with two ingredients and the one with other flavor because it's not the same.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about the different, like I've heard, can you explain the idea of like nikmam or the first batch? I mean, can you do a classification breakdown of what that all means to somebody who doesn't know much about fish sauce?
Yeah, it's just the term that people use, nước mắm nhĩ or nước mắm cốt, which is the first drain. So after the 12 months of fermentation, just like olive oil, you get that first drain, the first press. That's what we call. And that's what they call nước mắm nhĩ, right? But again, nước mắm nhĩ from that region versus nước mắm nhĩ from Phú Quốc is not the same back into the protein content. So yeah, anybody can claim it on the front label, but if you look at the nutritional panel, that's what tells you the real story.
And do you have different sort of brand hierarchy in your red boat? Do you have different sort of qualities that you sell?
Yeah. So we have 40N is our flagship product, right? So hit retail. We also have a lower grade, which is a 31N. That's more for food service and depends on what people use it for, but that's mainly for food service, for restaurant. And again, the chef knows best. They know how to integrate the sauce into the cooking. So sometimes they don't need the 40N, but a lot of them need it just for the finishing taste of it, of the dish. And some, use it to get like salt flavor and all that. So we have another level, is 31N. That's mainly for food service.
How did you figure out that there's 9N units different for food service? Like, how did you figure out like retail is 40N, which is I'm sure it's talking about protein levels, right? And then
Right.
31. Like, how did you know that you knock off 9Ns off of the product to go to
Yeah,
protein?
that's usually a second press also that we get
Ah,
that yield a lower end, lower nitrogen level because it's kind of diluted somehow. And that's what there's a big price difference between the two grades. And some people, when they cook and they use a lot with it, then they prefer the lower end, which is the 31N. And also food manufacturing that they integrate, that is an ingredient of one of their products, and they use that as well.
Oh, interesting. And then in terms of like the second press, like when you do you add more water to it or how does that work?
It works like you got the first press you get out, right? Um, it's a long process. You have to be in there. So basically, you run through. It's not salt water. You have like the lower end, and you step it up, right? If you have, um, you look at it like this, right? You drink coffee,
Yes.
you drink like caffeine,
Yes.
something, right? If you
Yes.
have 10 of them laying up, right? The first one is the strongest.
Right.
You set aside, and then you add hot water in there, right? So you get very diluted. And then all the first spread, you take it out. Like the first press on the coffee. Let's say you drain it, you get it. That's the strongest, that's the best you can get. And the other one, you dilute it with hot water and you get that grades. But instead of pulling the hot water into the other, let's say 10 cups, you put that into the other one, and then
Mm,
you get a little bit higher. Because let's say if you do, let's say if my barrel is 40, and if I put in salt water, it's gonna like gut it down to like 15,
mm,
20.
right.
You don't even then. And then you have to step it up until a certain level of protein. And that's how you do it. You're just not simply running salt water in there.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit sophisticated, but you can imagine if you line up 10 cup of coffee, caffeine, and then you kind of step it up that way.
You know what I've learned about a lot of founders like you is fish sauce is not the only thing that they know a lot about. What other things are you interested about and what other things do you dream of developing after sort of your journey with Redboat?
My goal is making good product from Vietnam's accessible to more people globally. And that's what we're still trying to achieve, right? We build a legacy and handed off the legacy into the family so that people can keep up with that. But yes, there's other product that we've been thinking and we've been trying to do. But for example, like nước chấm is one of the product that we use. The core sauce is also one that we use. And we have the salt, the dehydrated fish sauce when we get the salt out, and then you make the rubs. Just a compliment of what the fish sauce, in the cooking. And that's what but in my future I'd like to get into you know, doing wine stuff.
Wait. You would like to get into what?
Wine.
Wine.
Because very similar
Similar.
process, basically.
Interesting. And so, wait, can we talk about this? Like, are you studying it? Are you in actively kind of pursuing that in the back of your mind one day?
Yeah. I don't want to talk too much about it. So but that's something, the path that I'm pursuing down there, because there's a lot of similarity between the two, right? Is strongly terror related. If there's hundreds of thousands of brands out there, and everybody has a different preference. So we just kind of complement the food that people cook with. So that's what I'm thinking about. Say, okay,
Wine.
you can.
Grapes out of Vietnam or grapes out of California?
So Napa Valley, that's
Napa
where.
Valley.
Yeah, yeah.
Makes sense. Now, I can't stop thinking about the supply chain issues of the last few years because of COVID or just because of overall dynamics in the globalization, in the global economy. What kind of difficulty did you have? I mean, in the last few years, keeping up with supply?
No, it's a challenge, and an industry-wide challenge, because supply chains in terms of, we have the fish sauce, and then we have all the components that make a finished product, like
Yeah.
the bottle, the caps, the label, all that stuff, right? So look at from the manufacturing standpoint. Something that I learned from Apple. Apple is making computers, iPods, whatever, right? We're making fish sauce. Two different things. But if you look at it, the fundamental things is supply chains. How do you get the best components for your end products? The same thing with fish sauce, right? Nice bottle, glass bottle, you know, um, user impression. And then we have something like user friendly. What caps that we should use so that prevent leakage from around the bottles, if you notice, those kind of things. And the more components, the more potentially problem that you have, like if you have a supply chains issue. But our supply chains issue, because our main product is a fish sauce, and
Right.
that's in total control, so we're not worried about it. The supply chains issue that happened with us is more on the logistics side in terms of getting the freight from Vietnam to here because it had to stop. And then because whatever reason, the cost gone up so much because the demand gone up so much because the COVID, everybody, they're creating different type of demands for different type of product, so they have to competing with all those things like, people staying home, they buy all the gym equipment and they make all the gym equipment that taking up the space. That's where we can normally
Right.
that kind of challenge. I give you an example. When we ship product from Vietnam, it used to cost like 1,500, 2,000. One time we paid like $20,000 just to get shipped.
Oh my
Tenfold.
God.
It's not like
And that
it's not
wipes out your
like you have the
margin.
money, you can get the space. You gotta fight for it, and then you get congestion everywhere because it's just crazy. So the combination of the price and then on the space availability.
And that
So
could wipe out a business, right? If that
a
prolongs.
lot of people a lot of small business get wiped out. But we, our model is different, and this is something I can relate it back into my old tech days. Like back then, Apple, we creating products and we inventory them, right? And then consumer don't buy the stuff that we inventory. They want to buy the stuff that we're not inventory, that kind of thing. And we're not turning the products around fast enough to service consumer demand, right? So that a lot of inventory write-off because of that. So it's impact the bottom line. And I've been right in it. I can see, it's a growing parts of Apple, and there's a lot of demands, and we cannot get it. So that's something that I learned, and it can apply to in terms of scaling your business so that you can deal with when you have demands, because we're selling into different markets, right? The Asian supermarkets, we're selling to the specialty store like Whole Foods, Trader Joe, and all that. And they require different bottle
Yeah.
format. And then you don't know when they need it, but when they need it, you have to have it. It's not like, yeah, wait for 6 months, I bring it to you. No.
But you can't.
Then
How do you control 12 months? Because 12 months of fermentation is 12 months of fermentation.
that's right. That's why you kind of predict. And then you always inventory. The good thing with us, we have the sauce, and that's why the bottling line that we brought here into the Bay Area, we have a bottling line in Hayward that solve a lot of our problems with the supply chains and all that. Because our fish sauce will have a long shelf life anyway, and then we can store them here. And then whenever the demands come, whichever format that it might be, we can quickly turn that around, servicing it.
That makes so
Rather,
much sense.
yeah,
Throughout the years that you've been operating Red Boat, were there times where you wanted to quit and stop?
more than once, but no. Yeah, but looking at, there's always challenge. There's a time there's not enough fish, and all the industry they fighting, they buy fish from the fishermen, drive up the price of the fish, that kind of thing, and put a lot of the small business out. That's one of the challenge, right? And then supply chains. It's not so much of that at the time. Really well prepared. It's just hitting the cost, basically. Getting the right products. I mean, we've had our all 40 ends, but sometimes you get better as you're doing it. You're optimizing your process along the way. So I give you an example. You catch the fish, you put in the barrel. Before we hit like 70%, 60%. The other one's not good enough. We don't bottle, we ship it, and then so that is creating some problems, right? Because if you want to maintain the quality, that's the only way to do it. You just don't, you know, compromise the quality. And a lot of the time, that we have to go through it. And then but we learn and get out of there. But all my years with high techs and actually with Apple was really helped because Apple was going through the same thing. It was growing up and it was right in the middle there and then trying to find the solution for that. So scaling it, that's something that I always thought of. I said, oh, okay. You don't, that's what they keep telling. You don't want to be a victim of your own success. You're creating something that everybody wants and you can servicing it. And then you die, right? And then somebody came over and take it over from you, basically.
When you think about some of the Japanese businesses, some 900 years, 400 years, 200 years, succession of family members that are inspired to do it. In the West here, in the United States, it's very different. We, as children of our parents, want to do something very different. Somehow you've inspired your next generation. I understand Tiffany works very closely alongside of you. How did you navigate the journey of having your children be involved in the business? And I ask this because it's a very cultural phenomenon, especially as a Vietnamese second generation. There's many Vietnamese parents. I was in the same predicament. My parents wanted me to take over the business and I fought tooth and nail. I was like, that's not my identity. How was the story of you and your children, second generation, working in Redboat?
I think they see my mission, right? And I think they see how big this can be. And I think they know for sure that I need help. And I think that's what they come in. And I was lucky enough that they motivated enough, they would jump in both feet and trying to learn the business and helping us out. But they got involved at much earlier days when we started our business in the garage. Just like any, we get the product here, we do online, we do shipping, that kind of thing. And they kind of help in a way. So they kind of understand the business. And it was small. But then you can feel the response, the way how consumer foodies responds when they, use the products and all that. I think that's also a big motivation factor, and they want to keep it going.
So there wasn't a whole lot of convincing.
You can convince what you want, but if they don't see the good values of that, it's not just like, they have to see something that is worthwhile. And this is not just good for the business. This is the legacy that we'd like to build. And hopefully, we can just carry on.
Yeah, well, it's an exciting time to be Vietnamese. And, we are very proud. I'm always proud to see our names on screens, on movie screens, on credits. I'm excited to see Redboat at the mainstream supermarkets. And, every time we see it, there's a big sense of pride.
Yeah.
So I applaud you for carrying on this legacy and pushing the tradition of eating our foods in lands far away from Vietnam, like Europe and the United States. So we're all very proud of the brand Redboat.
Thank you.
And Cuong, thank you so much for opening up today. I really appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you for having me on your show.
Of course. My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. The Vietnamese is produced by Brittany Tran. Special thanks to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and comment. Please rate and give us a review wherever you find our podcasts.